Okay.
Okay, so I'm Louise Cook. I'm a lecturer in conservation at the University of York. I wear multiple hats. As you will find out, I'm also a trustee of Earth Building UK and Ireland, which sounds possibly a grander role than possibly it is. But I just want to put on my eBuckeye hat and just say an enormous thank you to Kat for hosting us again, particularly to Lou, who has just been working so hard to pull this event together, to all our eBuckeye directors and all the volunteers who have been putting on all of this extraordinary few days that we're going to have here. So my purpose today is to think about how we could use the lens of heritage to rethink some of our approaches to sustainability. And I should say from the very beginning, I started out as an archaeologist, so that has enabled me to excavate and conserve some very ancient structures, and I've had the enormous sort of pleasure of working on some of our very earliest structures, which enabled me to think about how Earth as a material unites both the past, the present and the future. And that's why you have an archaeologist who's been so very involved in eBuckeye from the very beginning as well. So what I'm going to do today is sort of move the conversation on from looking at things from the past and think about how we can think about sustainability in the future through this heritage lens. And I'm particularly interested in how this way of seeing the past as heritage could be used as a way of valuing past sustainable practice, and how I think this could actually help in this transition from disruptive technology to actually mainstreaming practice as well. And basically, if something can be defined as heritage, it becomes part of an official past. So classically, if something is heritage, we might put pictures of it on stamps, we might put pictures of it on pound notes. And somehow it's less risky and therefore less edgy, and we can perhaps think about heritage in this sort of way. So starting to think about sustainability as heritage, I'm starting to come across some separate areas of interest. And I must say both of these are areas in progress, and I will be hopefully sharing some thoughts about how I can develop these at the end as well. So the first is where historical approaches that we would now call sustainable are being overlooked. And I'm seeing evidence of this particularly where there are historic listed buildings, and the listed building descriptions are ignoring the sustainable aspects of a place or a building. And secondly, examples where sustainable approaches and histories could be embraced as heritage, and some thinking around what the benefits of that might be. And I've been thinking about this for quite a while now, and over the last few years, a certain number of things have happened that have sort of really given a bit of weight to this rethinking of sustainability as heritage. So if you don't know where this is the reopened Design Museum in the old Commonwealth building. And in 2016, this was reopened. And as part of the permanent exhibition and the permanent display there, the 1968 publication of the Whole Earth Catalogue is listed and is celebrated. And the Whole Earth Catalogue, as many of you will know, is an example of where some of these thinkings around sustainability started to be pulled together. What's really interesting for the Design Museum is that the curatorial team talked about how the Whole Earth Catalogue came out as a hippie counterculture in the 1960s, and they describe it as a manual, as an encyclopedic compendium, and part of a library review as well. And in their description, they talk about how the Whole Earth Catalogue can be seen as directly leading to the developments in Silicon Valley, which is a slightly interesting interpretation of the impact of the Whole Earth Catalogue. So when something becomes part of a museum collection, you could say that that's another example of something becoming heritage, that's being accepted as part of mainstream culture. And then 2 years ago, in August 2017, Historic England added Underhill to the list of the National Heritage List for England. And Underhill is an earth-sheltered house in West Yorkshire. It was designed in 1969 and then constructed from 73 to 75 by Arthur Quarmby as his family home. And it's an example of low-impact, innovative design. And it's really interesting that this has been listed. And the listing description picks up on the architectural interest as a low-impact, innovative construction. And when I then researched the listing process for this building some more, the way in which we list buildings tends to emphasise their architectural or historic interest. And I think this is one of the first examples where this innovative approach, the developing approaches to sustainable architecture, are being listed as having historic interest. And the way in which this is a pioneering build is all sort of celebrated in that listing description. So I think this is really interesting that sustainability is starting to be identified as official heritage. But really, what is the point in wanting something to be thought about as heritage? So why bother with this heritage lens? And I think I would argue that if something can be identified as heritage, it becomes that official part of a country's past. And there are clear links there to accepting, mainstreaming, and de-risking materials as well. And I certainly know from my time working in local authority how important it was to look at buildings and think about how we can de-risk the projects associated with them. We simply wouldn't question the old stuff, whereas newer stuff we might be a little bit more questioning about. Now, I'm really guilty, and I feel really bad, to be in this building and show a picture of concrete. So there are two examples that I just want to highlight where both 20th century architecture and graffiti have really been revalued through this heritage lens in recent years. So 20th century buildings were supported, celebrated by the 20th Century Society, and graffiti has also been looked at through both a sort of academic lens but also a heritage lens. And the sort of iconic example of this is the listing of Park Hill in Sheffield, which is a massive concrete housing estate built from 1957 through to 1960, and it was listed as Grade 2 Star in 1998. And it was really an iconic example of 20th century listing and has led on to many other 20th century concrete buildings being listed. At the same time, some of you will be very familiar with this iconic graffiti from Park Hill. It features in lots of popular culture at the moment. And this is a tragic story behind this graffiti, but it's an example of how looking at something through a heritage lens can lead to it being revalued, and in this case, an element of gentrification where the graffiti has then been highlighted in neon lights. So it's hugely controversial, but it has been important in sort of revaluing and thinking again our 20th century history. And there's now an enormous amount of policy and scholarship, both on 20th century buildings and on graffiti as well. So I'm just going to show you some quick examples of examples where I think sustainability interacts with heritage. And I've got some examples where historical approaches to what we would now call sustainable buildings are being overlooked. So this is where the listed building descriptions ignore the sustainable aspects of a property. And this is completely hot off the press from a conversation with one of our leading industrial archaeologists last week when I was talking about this presentation. And she said, "Oh, do you know about this building in Leeds?" And I said, "No, I don't." So this is Temple Works in Leeds, which is a flax spinning mill which was built in the 1830s. It's a celebrated building. It's built in the Egyptian style, and it's copying a temple in Egypt. So this you can get from its listing description as what is now a Grade 1 listed building. However, the building research associated with this has revealed that actually turf was laid on the roof here. So it had a turf roof, even though it had this amazing stone structure. So we think that the turf was being laid as part of an innovative system of environmental control. And the person I was talking to was telling me there's lots of anecdotes about sheep grazing on the roof here. And there's obviously some interest in trying to find out whether this is true or not. And then following on from this, there are evidently a number of other industrial buildings, particularly in the Baltic states, where there is turf being used as part of a system of environmental control. I've got some other examples of where historical uses of sustainable materials are being overlooked again in the way in which buildings are listed and protected. So these are the very famous homes for heroes, the experimental cottages built in Amesbury as part of the post-war need to provide housing, and which provided the first experimental buildings that the building research establishment were involved with. And again, they are listed on the basis of their historical significance as part of homes for heroes, but there is no mention of the greener rationale for which they're now valued. So there is an opportunity there to rethink that. And again, another example now from the 1960s would be the work that Peter Aldington did in Haddingham. I always struggle to pronounce that place name, but these are the 3 houses and the garden built at Turn End. And these were listed as Grade 2 star in 1998, and then in 2017 the gardens became part of the Register of Parks and Gardens. So the listing description here is becoming a bit more expansive and is starting to talk about some of the innovative use of materials in these houses. So there are Durex concrete blocks, and then there's a small section of the garden wall that has been built in Whitchurch. But there's potential here to really expand on the way in which the materials could be talked about. And I'm really sorry, Kat, about this, but I do think that the other part of this research is where sustainable approaches and histories really could be embraced as heritage. And I think there are enormous benefits for doing this. And just walking around the site again yesterday afternoon, obviously you're celebrating your 4 decades of experimental building here. But I do wonder how looking at this as heritage might help in that de-risking and mainstreaming of the work that happens here. And the other example, and I'm really sorry about this one, Roland, is the other examples where listed buildings are getting younger and much more diverse. So this is the Eden Centre, part of that series of Millennium Projects. There have already been dissertations on how the Millennium Projects could be listed. And just to put this in context, the British Library opened in 1997, but was listed in 2015. So actually, the potential for these structures to be listed is getting closer and closer each time. And I do think that it is inevitable that some of these Millennium Projects will end up being listed over the next few years. So again, unfortunately, one of the benefits of heritage that certainly Historic England talk about all the time is the benefit of heritage to the UK economy. Obviously, I think there are lots of other benefits of thinking about heritage and looking at heritage. I don't think it's just an economic value. But I do think that, again, one of these benefits of thinking about sustainability as heritage is to bring into that discussion about the benefit of sustainability to the UK economy, but from this other lens as well. And so what am I going to do with all of these ideas? And what I want to do is move on from this perception of future houses and sustainability from the Ladybird Book of the Future. I'm sure you see this a lot at CAT, perhaps in your introductory lectures. And what I want to do is take these themes of sustainability and heritage and develop one or several PhD projects. I've got the support of my lovely department in developing some of these projects as well, which is great, as I am a teaching focused member of staff. They're really keen to support this developing in different ways. And then over the summer, I really must finish writing some of this up, because I have had this on the sort of back, burning away for a few years now. And one of the problems I'm coming across is that actually some of these early examples of sustainability are not very well documented. So I may need to look at crowdsourcing in developing this research, or indeed share some knowledge with you all today as well. And then I'm also hoping to develop a much longer workshop on some of these themes for a future Clayfest as well. And it's also not just in the UK that we can look at sustainability and heritage. There are international dimensions as well. So I have a student joining the programme next year who has spent several years working at Euroville in India and looking at that relationship between sustainability and new materials there as well. And that hopefully brings me in on time. I had to follow a script because I knew I only had 15 minutes. And as my students from the course will tell you, I have a great ability to overrun. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lou. And note down your questions for later. So next we have Emma Appleton. Tim's going to come and do the IT stuff. Who's going to talk to us about rethinking building sites, I think.